G'day, I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. Today is March 5th, 2025, and I'm joined by my usual partners in crime here, Western Standard senior, I'll start with you, senior Alberta columnist, Cory Morgan.
Always happy to be. Were you trying to think what he actually does here?
Yeah.
I'm the opinion editor.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the opinion editor, of course, Nigel Hannaford. And we're going to have a few others coming in today. We're going to have Shaun Polzcer, a Western Standard business and energy reporter, joining us from another part of our offices around here, but just outside the studio. And we're going to have Western Standard BC Bureau Chief Jarryd Jäger joining us from Vancouver. And our Alberta legislative reporter, James Snell, joining us from Edmonton. We're going to be talking about the Liberal leadership campaign and the coronation that seems coming of Mark Carney. And, we had sent one of our reporters to a Mark Carney event right here in Calgary last night. And yet again, he refuses to allow Western Standard or any non-regime reporters in, for that matter. What is he so afraid of? Why is he intent on running such a Kamala Harris-style bubble-wrapped campaign? We're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about the budgets that came down last week in Alberta, and or is it earlier this week?
Last week
in Alberta, and yesterday in British Columbia. Both provinces totally blowing the money spigot open, running big deficits without particularly good big reasons. So we'll be talking about that with our reporters covering those respective beats, and we're going to try and make any sense, if it's possible, of Donald Trump's kind of mad dog trade war. I thought I was seeing strategy in it. I'm starting to see a lot less logical strategy in what he's doing. If he was trying to accomplish something, it seemed like he had a plan. But now I'm not even really sure what the guy's trying to accomplish. So we're going to try and make some sense of what's going on with that. Before we get going, though, I want to thank my favorite sponsor, New World Precious Metals. This episode of The Pipeline is sponsored by New World Precious Metals, based right here in Alberta. Years of inflationary money printing and rising debt have decimated the average Canadian's savings. Gold and silver are the only currencies that have held their value for thousands of years. Last year saw 30% gains. New World Precious Metals offers unique platforms to help protect and grow your hard-earned wealth with gold and silver. Check them out at newworldpm.com. And if you're interested in gold and silver, make sure you use these guys. They're a sponsor of the Western Standard, and by you supporting them, you're helping them to support us and the work that we're doing here. All right. So we're going to start by bringing in our Western Standard business and energy reporter, Shaun Polzcer. He is actually just in another room of our headquarters here in Calgary. So yesterday, Mark Carney came to Calgary and had a campaign event up in the northeast of the city. And we had a suspicion that he might not let... actually, we sent Shaun Polzcer, who you see here, and as well as Western Standard reporter Jen Hodgson. We sent both of them. We had a feeling that we might have an unfortunate repeat of when we sent James Snell, who's going to be on, actually, in the next segment. That we're going to have a repeat of this, where he just refuses to let Western Standard reporters in. Shaun, you were there. He allowed regime reporters in, that is, reporters funded by the federal government in, CBC, Global, CTV, Calgary Herald, the Calgary Sun, the Post Media papers.
Bloomberg.
Don't
forget Bloomberg.
Oh, Bloomberg. Bloomberg was there.
Of course.
So not many candidates get Bloomberg, but I guess Mark Carney is going to get Bloomberg. I didn't really need to tell you, but I did anyway, just for good measure. I was like, no episodes, not making a scene of yourself, be nothing but polite and professional. And you went there. We're not even going to show the clip. It's pretty boring. It's just you standing there nicely saying, can I come in, please? Here's my name on the registration. I registered. Here's the email we sent. And them saying, you're not on the list. You can't come in. I want you to just tell us what happened.
Well,
Derek, sometimes it's more effective to kill them with kindness. And so I went there. You picked the right guy for the job. I try to stay pretty low key. I talked up the volunteers and some of the local people there, the little people. You always got to make friends with them. And actually, I was surprised because for a minute there, it actually looked like I might get in, but it was almost like they were anticipating a scene. So, as I sat there and kind of waited and nothing happened, finally they just kind of moved in with the big guys and, showed us to the door. At the end of the day, they left it to one of their little volunteers. I don't know, she was about 21 or 22-year-old student, I think from your alma mater in Carleton there in Ottawa, where she was taking political science. And she was originally from Calgary, and we were swapping pictures of our dogs on the cell phones. And, initially she was extremely nervous because somebody must have told her that these big old mean reporters were coming. And, here I just asked her about how her studies were going, why she volunteered. She apparently seems to really believe in Carney and in the value of volunteering. And I said that the most valuable thing that people can contribute to the political process is their time. So.
Well, 20-year-old Carleton political science students will believe in anything. Let me assure you, gentlemen. We've seen this before. You dealt with it in particular, Nigel, when the NDP had an embargo against us. We weren't allowed to ask questions. They were unable to generally keep us out of things because we're part of the parliamentary press. It was a provincial issue. But, Rachel Notley would refuse to answer your questions because they didn't like the things we wrote. And that continued until Rachel Notley was gone. Prominent progressivist politicians like Naheed Nenshi take Western Standard questions. Carla Beck, the leader of the NDP opposition in Saskatchewan, has even done sit-down interviews with Chris Oldcorn, our bureau chief in Regina. But the federal Liberals in particular still seem to be very sensitive. And Mark Carney in particular, he pretty much doesn't talk to Canadian media, just very little Canadian media at all in terms of a sit-down with some back and forth where you actually might get into an issue. Then if he does answer questions at all at his events, it's strictly regime media. It is media that are approved by the federal Liberal government and receive money from them. We're approved by the Liberals. We just don't take the damn money. But, I guess this seems like a failing strategy that we've seen extremely recently. Kamala Harris did no interviews for a long time, and then she would do strictly only these kind of bubble-wrapped, hyper-safe interviews with friendly media only. And then as soon as she was exposed at all to any media, that wasn't even necessarily hostile, but any media that was not just kind of in their pocket, she fell apart. And it looks like Carney is following in a similar path.
Well, I think you've said it all, Derek. I've been around this business for 50 years off and on, and it was not like this. Now, one thing has changed. There is what you refer to as the regime media. And there are people who are not part of the regime media. If the vulnerable politicians are trying to draw a distinction. Well, you're not real media, if you're part of the new crowd. The other ones, yes, we have to talk to you whether we like it or not, but, you're just off the street. Well, it's completely untrue. So, as you can see probably in the background here, the viewer can see there's a whole infrastructure of news gathering and production that's in the background. They're entirely legitimate. But they cling to this as an excuse to not have to answer the questions that we would put to them, which would be more, I think, incisive and more difficult to answer. And when you've got a candidate like Mr. Carney, who has clearly taken the option of saying as little as possible to as few people as possible, thereby reducing the risk of what we used to call a bozo eruption, saying something that's very hard to defend, and you get these scenes where they just try to exclude you. But this is going to change because eventually the mainstream media will not be able to even turn up to the press conferences. The business model is failing. If they ever lose their government funding, then they will be in that much worse condition. And frankly, the people who mean business in Canadian politics are going to have to talk to us.
Cory, it's kind of popular nowadays to say, well, anyone can be a journalist. Sure, anyone can call themselves a journalist. And I think that's, broadly speaking, a good thing. But in terms of press availability and access, the line has to be, unfortunately, it has to be drawn somewhere. Not, if you're having a press conference, can literally any, hundreds of people with a phone just come up and get a line that, that's going to mean that professional journalists who do this for a living are not going to be able to ask questions. So we have to draw the line somewhere. I don't know where we draw the line. The only thing I know is the line should not be drawn by the politicians. All I know is that the line drawing doesn't get to be drawn by the people who are covering. The alternative to that seems to be that other journalists get to draw the line, and I'm not comfortable with that either, because then it becomes this insular club. The Western Standard is a member of several press galleries across Canada, and the press galleries decide on their own membership. And most of the time they do a reasonable job, but sometimes they flub it up. So who is media? Well, some are really clear. Some are not so clear. Is a guy with a podcast and a blog by himself one-man operation media? Sometimes no, but sometimes. Well, Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is kind of a one-man. He's got a little bit of a supporting cast now, but, the Western Standard, you see the liberal reactions on X is, well, you're not real media. Well, then who is? Who is? I mean, the Western Standard's got more reporters, I think, than any other media outlet in Alberta right now, except for the CBC with its unlimited budget. We're, on readership, we outdo the Calgary Herald, the Calgary Sun. So it's pretty hard to say no to us. But, the Carney campaign is saying no to anyone who is not regime media. But, where would you draw the line? Because a line must be drawn.
You have to discriminate at some point, and I guess we could endlessly debate where that line is, whether it's a smaller podcaster or a group of them or an individual. But I mean, to a degree, if you're going to measure that level down, the Western Standard is still quite well up there. I mean, it's not a matter of...
We're not anywhere near the line.
It's not that we don't have reach or don't have staff or legitimacy. The problem that's going on here is they're basing access on where our editorial leaning is, and that is problematic. That shows a fear of critical questions. And so, I mean, the line has to be drawn. They're drawing it based on ideology rather than need. You don't need 500 people in there screaming, but at the same time, that's not what their intent was. They want a friendly room. I just think it shows that they don't have confidence in their own candidate, though. And that's what's more telling than anything else, because the embarrassment of turning away media, and if you've got a good candidate, you just want to get their face in front of as many people as possible, because theoretically they're going to create converts and voters. And they obviously don't feel confident that Carney can do that, so they want to carefully curate who's going to have access to him. And it doesn't bode well for the general election.
Well, because, he's not a dumb guy. He's not Justin Trudeau. This is an intelligent man. He's had jobs beyond being a part-time drama teacher before going to.
But he's not a campaigner. That's a different art.
He's not a good campaigner. I mean, it was just days ago he kind of seemed to invent this factoid out of thin air that Canada supplies did he say 90% of the semiconductors to the United States or the vast majority or something to that effect. And then, 2-second Google search, you find out Canada isn't even in the top 10. It's I think it's 1% or maybe less than 1%.
Insignificant.
It's some insignificant amount. We're not even in the ball game. So, you would expect a journalist who shows up to say, where'd you get that from? That, and that's not a gotcha question. Our reporters, they don't yell at the politicians, hey, when did you stop beating your wife? They don't do that kind of stuff. But, if our reporters would have been allowed in, I think, our reporters would have probably asked something like, you claimed the other day that Canada supplies the vast majority of American semiconductors. Here's what the numbers say. You care to explain? We didn't even see that question from the legacy media there, as far as I know. But I don't know what he's so damn terrified. Campaigning for your leadership seasons you. It gets you ready for a real campaign.
Tough one coming.
And the lack of a primary, for Kamala Harris. She had no primary. She didn't have to take the beating and the grind of the nomination period that tempers you, strengthens you as a candidate. Maybe it destroys you as a candidate, but if it destroys you at that level, you probably shouldn't be in the general election. Maybe then it should be a different candidate. But, I think this is just going to mean, in the end, this is going to be bad for the Liberals, that they're going to have a weak candidate going in who can't stand the sunlight of a couple of very basic, simple questions.
Well, Derek, when you look at the four of them, it's hard to see one you like, isn't it? You say you have a weak candidate going in. Well, Chrystia Freeland has not impressed anybody as finance minister, and the other two are people, it's Karina Gould and Jim Bayless, but most people don't even know that they're in the race.
No.
So
they're not really on the race.
Well,
they're on paper.
Time will tell, I guess, but I can't. Certainly, I'm not. If there's an office pool, I won't be putting my bottle of beer on either of those.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually a really distressing thing that the Liberals, after nearly 10 years in office, and with a party history going back 100 years or more, can't come up with somebody better than what they're offering right now. What has happened to that party?
Actually, we haven't started our office pool for the leadership. I don't think there'll be. I think it'd be more like the Poilievre one about what's the margin going to be, because nobody bet that Poilievre was going to win, or even on first ballot. Our office pool on that was what's the margin going to be. So I've just made a little note here.
All right, good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know what more to say about that. The man's a coward.
Well, we will continue to try to bring him to action.
We're not going to stop. We're not going to stop sending reporters.
Those send reporters to the events.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for joining us today, Shaun. All right. We're going to bring in our Western Standard BC Bureau Chief, Jarryd Jäger here, and our Alberta legislative reporter based in Edmonton, James Snell. Let's start with BC. We start with a lot of Alberta stuff here, being Alberta-based. Let's start with British Columbia here. British Columbia picked a hell of a day in the news cycle to table their budget, Jarryd, which was, maybe that was intentional, I don't know. So, the BC budget got very overshadowed in the news cycle with, Trump tariffs coming into effect and all the, Trump has his address of the joint sessions of Congress. The news cycle was absolutely mad, and I think the VC budget got very little mention on the newscasts and in the newspapers. Why don't you just give us the real high level highlights of the BC budget, Jarryd?
Okay, so yesterday was a pretty hectic day in Victoria, and the BC NDP wasted no time in blaming the tariffs and Trump for not being able to meet their goals. So I'll start off with something everyone can understand. So there was a projected $10.9 billion deficit, which is the highest in the province's history. And this is despite not following through on their promised $1,000 rebate, which in and of itself would have cost $2 billion. So you think if they would have put that in, just how much higher that would have been. And they were slammed across the political spectrum for not following through on that promise. There's a guy here, Mo Amir. He's far from conservative, and he was saying EB and the finance minister Brenda Bailey, they should take $1,000 pay cut because that's basically what they've done to British Columbians by not including this in the budget. Something they really campaigned on, and so over the next few years, they projected that the deficit is eventually going to go down, but it's going to stay above $9 billion for the foreseeable future, which a lot of people have found unacceptable, considering that BC used to run surpluses.
Well, what's been the reaction of the Conservatives there? Because there hasn't been any significant Conservative opposition in British Columbia for some time. In the post-Gordon Campbell era, it was led by Christy Clark, who has finally admitted that she's a liberal. The Conservatives have really are now there as I think the province's biggest opposition in its history. It's formidable in size, but how was the reaction of that party to the budget?
Oh, they were not impressed. And they brought the numbers to prove that the BC NDP could have done so much more, but they just kind of fell back on their heels and refused to act. So, for example, the finance critic, Peter Mylibur, he pointed out that in September, growth was predicted to be 1.9%. Now, that has only fallen to 1.8% since, all the tariff nonsense has come into play. And so he was saying, how can you blame the tariff and Trump when the numbers that you had to work with back then, when you were formulating this budget, weren't that much different than they are today? And so he was asked yesterday, how much blame do you think the tariff should take? And he just flat out said, none. So that kind of gives you a sense of where the Conservatives stand.
Well, that would seem to indicate that actually, if the tariffs, we don't know how long they're going to be here, but if the tariffs actually do start to bite, the deficit will be significantly worse than they're projecting right now. Okay, let's bring in James Snell. He is our Alberta legislative reporter. He was in the lockup for the Alberta budget tabled late last week. I think normally they do it on Thursdays. I've been in a few of these budget lockups myself over the years. James, another big deficit, not as big as British Columbia's, but a big deficit, I think in the range of just north of $5 billion. Give us the highlights.
Derek, it's nice to see you. So the highlights are deficits projected for the next 3 years. And I think the Western Standard asked the best question of the finance minister, and that was, why is such a rich jurisdiction like Alberta even having a conversation about deficits, given the fact that some experts in the energy industry say the province is sitting on not one, but 2 Saudi Arabias. And so, the question for me was, we have an awful lot of natural resources in this province, but yet we're also having some financial hardship. So deficits are projected for the next 3 years, and also a moderate, I don't want to call it insignificant, because it will be significant to some people, but a relatively small tax break for many Albertans who earn incomes less than $60,000 a year.
So we're still not seeing the major tax cuts promised from the election campaign, right?
That's correct. And so there was a lot of talk in the budget documents about the government of Alberta operating under the dark cloud of tariffs. And so far, we don't know exactly. We know the tariffs are going to hurt Alberta. We know they're going to potentially harm oil and gas sector, but we don't know what degree that's going to happen. And certainly Trump is proving himself to be fairly inconsistent in what he's saying. Nobody can really predict what he's going to say.
Well, I think that's putting it politely, yeah.
Yeah.
Go to you first, Cory. Still no delivering on the tax cut, which was the main promise of the election. Still, big deficit, and this cannot be chalked up to tariffs right now. It could actually be worse depending on how much the tariffs end up biting. There's no good reason for this. This is spending. They have the UCP government prior to Smith had done some very moderate fiscal discipline while Kenny was there. He never cut spending, he never reduced it, but he just kind of held the line as revenues grew, which is kind of the minimally fiscally conservative thing you can do. And the Smith government's been strong on a bunch of points. But God, they have been so damn weak on fiscal discipline and the budget. They're not delivering the tax cuts, and we still have a big deficit because they've blown the bank on spending here.
Yeah, I think it was an 8% increase this year. If they had just kept it at zero, they would have a surplus. And I know it's hard to even keep it at zero when, every deputy minister's banging on your door and saying, I need more for this, I need more for this, I need more for this. But that's the tough job. That's why you're in the big chair. When you say no, you find some corners to cut. Danielle Smith has always been at least to be able to speak fantastically as a fiscal conservative. She certainly would hold the other premier's feet to the fire in the past. It's time for that government to practice a bit of what they used to preach and at least hold the line on the spending. But she's juggling a whole bunch of balls. I think she set aside the fiscal aspect of things, but that can't be allowed to continue. It can't. If you want to see a right movement, as Alberta tends to splinter and foster them, you keep running those deficit budgets and you'll watch one start to spring up. That's how the Wild Rose began in the first place, was bad fiscal practices. And she could lay the groundwork for that if she didn't get it under control.
Nigel, we all know Premier Smith around here. We know in her heart she's a fiscal conservative. She's been living and breathing this stuff since you worked with her back at the Calgary Herald, in an earlier part of your career. She's always been consistent on this stuff. But now that she's got the levers of power, we're just not seeing it. What to you accounts for the disconnect between what we know she actually believes? This was not rhetorical stuff for her. She's been too consistent about it for too long. What's the disconnect between what we know she believes and what she's actually delivering in these budgets here, which is big spending and now big deficits?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things at work here. One is that the province is actually growing in population. So when you have more people to service, you will end up having to spend more money. The second thing is that the two largest expense line items are education and health. Both of those professions are overloaded with people. And there's a long history in Alberta that we pay the people who are working as teachers and as nurses more than they earn elsewhere. This has been examined by the Taxpayers Federations of all over the place. We always end up looking like, if you're going to be a teacher, this is the place to be one. So they ultimately need to take this on. But when they take it on, they need to be ready to take a strike. And I'm not sure that they are ready to take a strike as a party at the moment. But the second that you're actually trying to rein in the salary expectations of those two large professions, who you know both hate the UCP government and will work hand in hand on this, there's going to be a big fight when it happens.
Well, I know the Alberta Teachers Association union contract is coming up. They're spoiling for a fight. I mean, we need a strike. Like, they should be locked out. There should not only not be increases, there needs to be cuts.
Well, Derek, I could agree with you on that, but I tell you what, the phones will be ringing off the hook by people who have to go to work and have no place to dump their kids. They take
I'll be one of them, but I'm also a taxpayer, and I'm sick of this.
No, if you bring her in, and she'll play in the corner over there, but most people can't do that.
No.
And that's something that orderly MLAs don't want to contend with.
I have an idea. We convert the public schools into charter schools. That'll deal with the ATA real quick.
Well, geez.
There just won't be an ATA to deal with. These guys have got to take some responsibility here. I mean, the Conservatives in Alberta have cut them a lot of slack now, since Smith became premier on the fiscal issues, because she was delivering on sovereignty issues. She was delivering on, some of the woke issues. She's been pretty solid on those fronts. And so she's been, I think Conservatives have given her a lot of slack, but this is the meat and potatoes stuff, and they're not minding the shop. This is the stuff that's out of control and can hurt you in the long term.
If you really want to get historical about it, this goes back to Rolf Klein. They had some fantastic revenue years. The contracts were up, and instead of fighting, he just gave them what they wanted, and that set the...
Look, I was the finance critic of the Wild Rose opposition. I know this stuff inside and out. No one really wants to tackle it. But, I mean, there was a little bit of fiscal discipline during the Kenney Goedes. I'm not too charitable with that government, but give credit where it's due. There was a little bit of fiscal discipline. And they've blown even that. I don't know. I think it's time for some heads to start to roll inside the UCP government. because I think I'm out of slack to give on the budget. It's not acceptable. Anything else from either you, Jarryd, or you, James?
For one thing that I found interesting is the budget. It accounted for carbon tax revenue through 2028 and beyond, even though EB has said that the NDP government will do away with the provincial consumer carbon tax as soon as the federal government says that it's okay.
It is an interesting thing.
So it makes you wonder.
You know what? I think considered marching orders right now. I want you to dive a bit deeper into that.
Okay.
All right. Last thoughts from you, James?
My last thought is UCP MLA Sinclair from Lesser Slave Lake was very unhappy with the budget and published a lengthy and sharply worded statement on Facebook criticizing the budget. Basically, his argument was his riding is producing an awful lot of wealth that's generated for the province, a lot of revenue going out, and he is dissatisfied with the amount of spending and projects in his riding. So that I thought that was quite interesting.
You know what? I'll give some orders to you here too. I want you to contact him, invite him to write a guest column for us. Let's give a little platform to some dissenting voices in the UCP until management starts to get a little common sense on this stuff.
You bet.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right. So, we were talking of tariffs impacts on the Alberta and BC budgets there. But we're going to zoom out just kind of on the issue in general. My worry about doing this right now is by the time some people listen to this, if it's after the fact of it being live, if you listen to this tomorrow, we could be living in a different set of facts, another world, because this stuff changes every day. I'm not going to recount the whole history of Trump's threats and carrying through and postponing and then implementing and then exempting of tariffs. All I'm going to say is I'm not sure I'm seeing the eye of the deal here. Maybe he's just so damn smart we can't see it. Maybe there is a plan, but it's just looking like he's a mad dog without much sense. I can see some of the stuff when he was, the ones on China. China does screw them all out of trade deals. Canada is wrong on a few points. He'd be right to go against our tariffs that are in the over 200% against American dairy. I mean, we're guilty of sin there, and it's actually not good for Canadians.
142%.
222.
Yes.
So look at you.
Yes.
Walking
That's
encyclopedia.
a font of information.
Yeah. He'd be right to stick us on there. He'd be right to stick us on a lot of the protectionist measures we have keeping out American banks. There's a number of things where we are guilty. We keep American health companies because we like to have Canadian government monopoly healthcare. So we're keeping out American health companies in that. There are some areas where we're guilty. And, telecom, for God's sakes, airlines, we're very guilty on a few fronts. And, of course, the need for us to increase our military spending.
Actually, you're winning me over here to the Trump side with our guilt.
Well, yeah, but he's not talking about most of that. He mentions some of these things once in a while, but it's not like he's lined up and said, here is my list of grievances. Fix these grievances or else you're going to get this list of tariffs. That would make sense. This is it just seems chaotic, and it doesn't seem to make any sense to me anymore.
I can offer you one theory, and that is that if you're negotiating with somebody, you create fear and distress, and one of the ways that you can create fear and distress is by creating uncertainty. So yes, today it's about fentanyl and about poor immigration policies, and you think, all right, well, that I can do, I'll work on it, or at least I'll pretend to. And then you come back and say, oh, actually, it's also you're not spending enough on continental defense. And you keep this up over a period of time, and eventually the victim in this story, which happens to be the government of Canada, and ultimately the people of Canada, becomes so uncertain as to what game is actually played that in the end, when you do come in with a final offer, they take it, whatever it is, because they just want certainty. They just want it all to stop.
Maybe. I mean,
Yeah, maybe. I didn't get
the thing is, I'm not even seeing that anymore. It's like, I mean, if you want to do that, you do that on the threat side. But he's not making clear demands. He had a few demands, and we either did something or pretended to do something, depending on how charitable you're being to the government. But he's not being very clear about what his issues are. And it might just be, one day he says, "I just like tariffs. It's my favorite word. It's the greatest word in the English language." And he might just want tariffs to be a major source of American revenue. That's extremely poor economics and fiscal policy, but I mean, it is an option that he can pursue, however ill-advised it might be. Fine. But he's not being clear about which ones they are. Then he's talking about the stack tariffs. There's like a general tariff, and then there's ones for these set of grievances. It's just not making any sense to me anymore, Cory.
No, I can't see the end game in the Orange Man's plan here. As Nigel said, I mean, there's tactics, shake them all up and then start negotiating. But at some point, you got to stop shaking. And it could go the other way because a lot of Canadians are getting really, really pissed off. And it might not be to the point of saying, I've had enough, I'll agree to anything. It might be, you know what, I'll give him the middle finger no matter how much it hurts us because I'm sick of this. Plus, you can't trust him. And that's part of the problem. 5 years ago, when he tore up NAFTA and then insisted on getting the USMCA,
This is his agreement he's violated.
it was the best deal ever signed. That's his words. And then he tore up his own bloody agreement. How do you do business if you can't have a contract that's abided by? So, I mean, I can only assume he's not stupid. He's pretty crazy, it seems, but he's not stupid. He's got something in mind. He's got an end game, but nobody can see it yet. And,
he does have an end game in mind. I'm actually, because it's entirely convinced there is. And
it's causing a lot of real damage. You're shaking the economies of both countries. We've got companies that are really getting damaged with this. So if there's a game going on, then start to move towards the goal line, Mr. President, because this is now just getting stupid.
Well, again, it's only a theory because none of the three of us really know exactly what that's the whole point of the discussion. We don't know what the game plan is. But I did notice when I watched the joint presidential address last night, that early on he said that he had met with the big three heritage motor manufacturers, Ford, Chrysler, General Motors, and that they were happy. And up until that point, we had been making the point editorially that these guys are going to have a problem because cars go backwards and forwards.
well, they just got an exemption.
And they've got a 1 month exemption. So I'm wondering if the end game for him is not to just bring that entire industry back over the border.
Actually, his spokeswoman was saying precisely that today. Is that you've got a month reprieve, but you need to start moving your operations over.
Well, there you are.
I mean, some days I like the guy, some days I don't. But I don't know how much. I don't think you just can't trust him. Like, I think we're a friendly. I think Paul, you put it well. Like, if Canada's not your friend, then who is? And there is things that Canada is doing wrong on trade, where we are being dishonest, where we are being protectionist. It's very rich of us to wrap ourselves in the free trade banner and say we're the world's greatest free traders. Oh yeah, can I buy some Wisconsin cheese? No, you cannot. It's next to illegal to get. There's no point in importing because it's so expensive. So we're hypocrites on this stuff, and early on I was like, yeah, okay, you know what? Actually, maybe it'll be good for us because he's going to force us to give up on some of these protectionist measures. But I'm not. I think it's not even. I don't think he's actually trying to get us to become more free trading. I think he's just trying to bring it all directly into the United States.
If they're going to get that insular, that can be dangerous. Canada's not. Yeah, it's a much smaller market than the United States, but it's right next door and it's 40 million people. We buy a lot of goods, and we do have our own protectionist stuff. You know why you can't get a diesel Toyota Tundra? Because they're not allowed to sell it here. But that could change. And I tell you what, Toyota makes a hell of a better car than the big three. I don't care what other people say. And I don't know. You bring me a Toyota diesel and I'm willing to invest in that thing. And I'm just saying this is
I'm a bit biased against Japanese and Korean trucks. Good cars, but I'm a bit biased against their trucks. But
take a Land Rover out for it.
maybe I should take them.
But I'm just saying that, there are alternatives out there. There's people willing to start filling those voids, and just we're not winning. We're not winning. These are heavy items. We have integrated markets, pulling everything down into the United States and castrating Windsor. Okay, but that long-term game, I don't know if it's really going to benefit the United States either in the end.
It comes back to the big question again. He keeps talking about annexing Canada. Is this chaos, which does not appear to be headed towards a deal? And again, I could. By the time you listen to this, it could be a bloody deal. They're going so damn fast. But is this to economically strangulate Canada to try and annex it? Again, it sounds crazy, but it's a fair question in 2025.
It is a fair question, but one of the answers is, why would Trump want a bunch of liberal voters?
Fine, but he said he wants them. He said he wants them.
We don't know what to believe.
You don't know when you believe him and when not to. I mean, sometimes he is trolling. Sometimes he sounds more serious. Do I think he could be serious about wanting Alberta? Maybe Saskatchewan? Yeah, I could see that. I could see the economics of it. I could see the politics of it. I could see him wanting that. I have a hard time seeing why you would want all of Canada. I mean, it's a lot more trouble than it's worth, buddy. But, is that his goal? Is this just chaos and economic pain until either the whole thing or part of it breaks apart? I mean, that would seem to make more sense than he's trying to get to a new deal right now.
Oh. As I say, I stand by my theory that chaos comes and then comes the final demand. But what do I know?
Well, I guess most of us, as we're saying, we hope to see that demand. Let's just start to see some light so we can work towards.
But that's exactly what I'm saying. You're now to the point of saying, I'm sick of all this. Show me what you want, and we'll sign.
Well, I didn't say we'll sign. I said we got to show.
Tell me what you want. You want a duffel bag of money and a helicopter to Mexico. Because give me your demands.
Because we gotta get on to that phase of it, and I understand tough negotiating. I mean, down to Mexico, I see a bunch of raw opal I want to buy. How much do you want for that? $5,000. Okay, Pedro, you're insane. That stuff's terrible. The clarity's awful. I'll give you $500 for it. We fight back and forth for an hour, and eventually it sells for $2,000. But we got to get to that first point of those crazy.
We're not even saying what he wants to buy.
Yes, that's
what we don't know.
So I'm hoping we can move on to that phase.
Mm-hmm. All right, speaking of moving on, let's move on to our parting shots. Start with you, Nigel.
Oh, well, Derek, I was just going through the news this morning, and I see that if you can't afford the $5 million gold card to get U.S. citizenship, for a mere $105,000, you can get gold card membership of the island of Nauru in the middle of the Pacific, where the sun always shines and the palm trees wave, and it's just a lovely place to be. The only problem, which makes this a bad deal, and I'm not going for it, is that they take that $105,000 and they put it into climate control strategies, because as the sea level is rising, they say, they're all going to get flooded out. So it might be a short-term citizenship that you're getting into.
But bring your water wings.
But yeah, bring your own boat. Sure.
All right, Cory, your parting shot.
Well, I just saw a great example, though, unfortunately, as our lame duck Trudeau regime leaves, of how performative they really are. When we had the reappearance of G.I. Jolie at Justin Trudeau's conference.
Let's put that picture up. Put it up on the screen.
Because, she has, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's Melanie Jolie, our foreign affairs minister, a little military-ish sort of little outfit that she likes to put on, and it's not a coincidence. She only puts it on when they're doing one of their war footing conferences, whether it's Gaza or Ukraine, and in this case now it's the trade war. There she was, looking nice and military, standing.
So she looked pretty hot. Eh?
Oh, she was certainly easy enough on the eyes, but I prefer somebody who's easier on my brain. And these shows that they do when we're dealing with serious business reminds us that we just don't have a serious government right now.
All right. For mine, mine's not technically real news. It's fake news, but it's fake news that speaks a very real truth. Let's put this tweet up on the screen here. So this is from I think this was from the Babylon Bee. Germany commits to 100% electric vehicle terror attacks by 2035. Germany has had yet another terror attack. Some maniac gets in a car and drives to a crowd. It is endless. I mean, I don't know why terrorists didn't start this a lot easier earlier. It's a lot easier to pull off than a 9/11. It's less splashy, a little less panache in your terrorist attack. But this stuff is constant across Europe. It's now become every few weeks in Germany. Germany just voted between the new CDU, ever so barely moderately conservative government, and the AfD, the more robustly right-wing party. Clear majority of Germans have voted to end mass migration into Germany, finally. But that's not what they're going to get, because the CDU is going to form a super coalition with the left-wing parties to keep out the right. But I thought it was just so bloody. It just captured the spirit of Europe. That, Germany commits 100% electric vehicle terrorist attacks by 2035. Technically fake news, but I thought that spoke a greater truth than anything in the real news today. Okay, gentlemen, thank you for joining today.
Always a pleasure.
And thank all of you for joining us on the pipeline today. Remember, the Western Standard is bailout free. We are one of the very, very last media left in Canada that refuse to take the Trudeau media bailout with your tax dollars. We're supported by advertising and by people like you. To support us, go to westernstandard.news right now. Click on subscribe. A membership is only $10 a month or $100 a year, and that'll give you unlimited access to all Western Standard content. You get past that pesky paywall, and you'll be supporting the good work that we do here. Thank you very much for joining us today. God bless.
What does success mean to you? Peace of mind? Financial freedom? Generational wealth? What do you see in your future? Investing in gold and silver can help you get there. Through our trading partners, New World Precious Metals offers safe, affordable, secure international accounts to help you meet your unique financial goals. Connect with one of our experienced team members. Invest in gold and silver today.